He grinned broadly at them and headed off to the staff table, still swinging the polecat. "Wonder what he's getting ready," said Ron, a note of anxiety in his voice. The hall was starting to empty as people headed off towards their first lesson. Ron checked his timetable. "We'd better go. Look, divination's at the top of the North Tower. It'll take us 10 minutes to get there." They finished their breakfast hastily, said goodbye to Fred and George, and walked back through the hall. As they passed the Slytherin table, Malfoy did yet another impression of a fainting fit. The shouts of laughter followed Harry into the entrance hall. The journey through the castle to North Tower was a long one. 2 years at Hogwarts hadn't taught them everything about the castle, and they had never been inside the North Tower before. "There's got to be a shortcut," Ron panted, as they climbed their 7th long staircase and emerged on an unfamiliar landing, where there was nothing but a large painting of a bare stretch of grass hanging on the stone wall. "I think it's this way," said Hermione, peering down the empty passage to the right. "Can't be," said Ron. "That's south. Look, you can see a bit of the lake out the window." Harry was watching the painting. A fat, dappled grey pony had just ambled onto the grass and was grazing nonchalantly. Harry was used to subjects of Hogwarts paintings moving around and leaving their frames to visit each other, but he always enjoyed watching them. A moment later, a short, squat knight in a suit of armor had clanked into the picture after his pony. By the look of the grass stains on his metal knees, he had just fallen off. "Aha!" he yelled, seeing Ron, Harry, and Hermione. "What villains are these that trespass upon my private lands? Come to scorn at my fall, perchance? Draw, you scaves, you dogs!" They watched in astonishment as the little knight tugged his sword out of his scabbard and began brandishing it violently, hopping up and down in rage. But the sword was too long for him. A particularly wild swing made him overbalance, and he landed face down in the grass. "Are you all right?" said Harry, moving closer to the picture. "Get back, you scurvy braggart! Back, you rogue!" The knight seized his sword again and used it to push himself back up. But the blade sank deeply into the grass, and though he pulled with all his might, he couldn't get it out again. Finally, he had to flop back down onto the grass and push up his visor to mop his sweating face. "Listen," said Harry, taking advantage of the knight's exhaustion. "We're looking for the North Tower. You don't know the way, do you?" "A quest!" The knight's rage seemed to have vanished instantly. He clanked his feet and shouted, "Come, follow me, dear friends, and we shall find our goal, or else shall perish bravely in the charge." He gave the sword another fruitless tug, tried and failed to mount the fat pony, and cried, "On foot then, good sirs and gentle lady, on, on!" And he ran, clanking loudly, into the left side of the frame and out of sight. They hurried after him along the corridor, following the sound of his armor. Every now and then they spotted him running through a picture ahead. "Be of stout heart! The worst is yet to come!" yelled the knight, and they saw him reappear in front of an alarmed group of women in crinolines, whose picture hung on the wall of a narrow spiral staircase. Puffing loudly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione climbed the tightly spiraling steps, getting dizzier and dizzier, until at last they heard the murmur of voices above them, and knew they had reached the classroom. "Farewell!" cried the knight, popping his head into a painting of some sinister-looking monks. "Farewell, my comrades in arms! If ever you have need of noble heart and steely sinew, call upon Sir Cadogan." "Yeah, we'll call you," muttered Ron, as the knight disappeared, "if we ever need someone mental." They climbed the last few steps and emerged onto a tiny landing, where most of the class was already assembled. There were no doors off this landing. Ron nudged Harry and pointed at the ceiling, where there was a circular trap door with a brass plaque on it. Sybil Trelawney, divination teacher, Harry read. How are we supposed to get up there? As though in answer to his question, the trap door suddenly opened, and a silvery ladder descended right at Harry's feet. Everyone went quiet. After you, said Ron, grinning, so Harry climbed the ladder first. He emerged into the strangest-looking classroom he'd ever seen. In fact, it didn't look like a classroom at all. More like a cross between someone's attic and an old-fashioned tea shop. At least 20 small circular tables were crammed inside it, all surrounded by chintz armchairs and fat little poufs. Everything was lit with a dim crimson light. The curtains at the windows were all closed, and the many lamps were draped. Lamps were draped with dark red scarves. It was stifling warm, and the fire, which was burning under the crowded mantelpiece, was giving off a heavy, sickly sort of perfume as it heated a large copper kettle. The shelves running around the circular walls were crammed with dusty-looking feathers, stubs of candles, many packs of tattered playing cards, countless silvery crystal balls, and a huge array of teacups. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder as the class assembled around them, all talking in whispers. Where is she? Ron said. A voice came suddenly out of the shadows, a soft, misty sort of voice. Welcome, it said. How nice to see you in the physical world at last. Harry's immediate impression was of a large, glittering insect. Professor Trelawney moved into the firelight, and they saw that she was very thin, her large glasses magnified her eyes to several times their natural size, and she was draped in a gauzy spangled shawl. Innumerable chairs and beads hung around her spindly neck, and her arms and hands were encrusted with bangles and rings. Sit, my child, my children, sit, she said, and they all climbed awkwardly into armchairs or sank onto poufs. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat themselves around the same round table. Welcome to divination, said Professor Trelawney, who had seated herself in a winged armchair in front of the fire. My name is Professor Trelawney. You may not have seen me before. I find that descending too often into the hustle and bustle of the main school clouds my inner eye. Nobody said anything in answer to this extraordinary pronouncement. Professor Trelawney delicately rearranged her shawl and continued.